Good morning, everybody. My name is Sue Turton, and this is the first session of the day, how to cover extremism and survive. And I suppose the key thing is we're all still sitting here, so we did survive. I think the thing we're going to be looking at today is what it's like to be in a very difficult environment working as a journalist, or have your people working as journalists, what we've learned from that and what we can take away from that, and how we can inform in the future. And I've got 4 cracking panellists sitting with me right now. I'm going to ask them each in turn to introduce themselves and just give you an idea a little bit about who they are and what they've done before. So first of all, Atyani, who is a senior correspondent for Arabiya, and one little quick note about him, he interviewed Osama bin Laden.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Atyani. I work for Al Arabiya News Channel. I'm a journalist for the past 18 years. I worked mainly in Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and I worked in Southeast Asia for some time, and Central Asia. I covered the war in Afghanistan in 2001. Before that, just a few weeks before that, I was able to interview bin Laden, and the news was all about something big is going to happen in a few weeks, and I guess that was the 9/11. I covered Bali bombing, the first one, the second one. As I told, I worked in Central Asia for some time, and worked in the Philippines, and unfortunately this thing led into something unexpected. I was taken a hostage by ASG, Abu Sayyaf group, for 18 months. I went there to work on a documentary about the conflict in Mindanao, but this, I've landed in a big trouble, and I stayed there for it was just an interview for 2 hours, so it took me 18 months to come out of that place. So this is just a quick and a brief.
Thank you. Next we have Wahyu Dhyatmika from Tempo magazine, and his experience is, I suppose, Indonesia, but the whole region as well.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wahyu Dhyatmika. I work for Tempo back in Jakarta, Indonesia. I just returned to my newsroom after a year with the Nieman Fellowship at Harvard. Before that, I was the desk editor for the investigative unit at Tempo magazine. But since I returned, I'm now in charge of the news gathering unit for the whole Tempo media group. I think related to our topic today, I would like to share some of the experience in Indonesia covering terrorism since 2000. We have more than 30 incidents of terrorism across the region, across the country. And I think the last incident, if you can recall, is the January Jakarta attack, where 6 small explosives exploded at the capital city, killing 8 people and injuring dozens.
Thank you. Thirdly, Mariam Oubaiche, who works for Al Jazeera, and has extensive experience Algeria, Northern Africa, and the Middle East.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mariam Oubaiche. I'm from Algeria. I had the opportunity to start my career as a correspondent for Al Jazeera television for more than 7 years, and then I joined Al Jazeera Arabic channel in 2002, and I had many chances to cover certain difficult areas like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. But of course, my first love will be always Afghanistan, because I had to do many different stories and in different places, Kabul, Bamiyan, Kandahar. And in Syria, it was a little bit more complicated because of the war. I have been there in 2012 and 2013, and there was airstrikes and the factions, some fighting between the factions themselves. I did certain exclusive stories, but the purpose for me was to be with the civilians and to share their misery, their difficulties, and how they could survive despite all what was happening in their countries.
Thank you, Mariam. And lastly, Jahanzaib Haque, who is our Pakistan expert.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jahanzaib Haque. I am the editor of Dawn.com, which is the digital edition of the Dawn newspaper, which has been around since 1947. With regards to this topic, what I have to say is that I kind of cover a network of 500 to 600 reporters within Pakistan, a number of whom are stringers in some very, very dangerous areas. So the question becomes, how do we keep them safe? And how do we keep them safe in an environment where we are sandwiched between two types of groups? As I was talking to you earlier, we have the non-state actors, which are a bunch of terrorists, and we have the state actors, who shall not be named because one of them must be in here, right? Can you raise your hand, please? Okay, fine. They're probably watching the live stream. Anyway, so the question is, how do we navigate this, and how do we deal with this nicely, because I'm still here. And yeah, that's all from my end. And also, one last thing. If you tweet using IPIWoCo, I will be watching it, and I can take the questions at that point as well.
He's obviously going to be trouble. A little bit about me. I've been a TV reporter for 26 years. The last 6 were with Al Jazeera, English, Afghanistan correspondent, and then I covered the Libya revolution, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Ukraine, and so on. Going from embeds with ISAF in Afghanistan to Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. And some of you might remember, I was convicted along with several of my colleagues of terrorism in Egypt. Most of us are still convicted terrorists in Egypt, which prevents us from traveling to quite a few countries. So that's the panel. And as Jahanzaib said, if anybody has any Twitter questions, if they let us know on the Twitter feed that's watching on the live stream, that'd be great. But we will take some questions from the floor as well after we've had our hopefully lively debate. So let's kick off first of all. I think the first topic should be preparation. When preparing to go into conflict zones, war zones, or even just countries where it's very difficult to report, what are the things that we do before going in there? And that's not just the people who are going, it's also those people who are sitting on the news desks, the editorial staff, concerned about our safety when we are in those places. And I'm going to start with Baker. Obviously, the interview I mentioned earlier, the Osama bin Laden interview, the one that I think our whole generation would have liked to have got. What sort of preparation do you do before going to do a big interview like that?
Well, back then, before, like in 2001 or before that, it was almost safe, I can say, interviewing militants. There was no any record of kidnapping or any sort of something like that. So when I was contacted that there is an opportunity to interview Osama bin Laden, I have talked to my editor. We've discussed it, and we found, yeah, it's safe to go, and it's a good opportunity. It's going to be a big scoop. So the preparations were taken from their side, not from my side, to take me to from Pakistan inside Afghanistan. It was all of their arrangements, even their camera. It was their own camera. Everything was their own. And it went the way we thought about it, that it will be safe and there will be any danger. But we kept it secret. It was just between me and another 2 guys inside the newsroom, the director of news and my editor. They were all, only these 2 guys were aware of it, because we don't want really the news to come out. A lot of risk will be, I might be traced, I might be tracked by too many people interested to know where is OBL. So I think we've done the preparation this way. We thought about it. We found it is safe. Then I went ahead and I did the interview.
And the sorts of interviews you've done since then, the preparation, I know you did one interview that was particularly worrisome. Again, what sort of concerns are there beforehand, not when you're actually stepping on the plane, but what can you do to minimize what happens on the ground?
I want to talk about my experience as a hostage. I think I have failed in doing one thing, which any journalist should do. I didn't do my homework on my producer. I believe till now, the case in the court, but I believe that my producer, the journalist who arranged my interview and my work in Sulu, in Mindanao, was the guy who sold me out to ASG, to Abu Sayyaf Group. I didn't do my homework. So I think one of the main things a journalist should do is to know with whom he is working. I've been like teaching, actually, working in hostile environments and covering wars and conflict zones. And I always tell journalists, you need to know who's your producer, who's the journalist you're going with. Are you going also with someone from the government, an activist who belongs to a militant group or not? I failed really to do it myself, and this had, as I said, the case in the court, but I have named the guy as a suspect in this case. I guess he was very much involved in my kidnapping. So I think this one of the things we need really to do our homework very well on.
I mean, Mariam, that's a good point, isn't it? It's not just the producer, it's not just the local fixer, it's the driver, it's everybody that's involved with you. You need to be worrying about.
Actually, for me, it was a little bit different, and I don't think I'm a good example to follow, unfortunately, because I think more about the logistic, preparation. I think about the Wi-Fi, I think about the camera, I think about the fixer also. If he knows, if he has good connections, where he can take me. But I don't think, I never think about security, about my safety. Because, I philosoph on that by telling myself, these people are surviving what's happening in their countries. So I'm sure I will survive, me too. And I'm here just for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I will come back to Doha. So it's worth it, to go and to try this adventure. It's very important, but sometimes, sometimes you can be in trouble. It happened to me. I did an interview with the Taliban fighters, and when I finished my interview, the guy told me, you have to delete all the interview because you are a female, and it's against the reputation of our state and the Sharia. I had to negotiate with him for 2 hours. It was a little bit complicated. What helped me is the fact, perhaps I think of being Muslim, so I had to use some verses of Quran, and but I was scared at that time, I think, And sometimes I think I trust too much the fixers, and this is not good. And at the same time, I don't want to work with guys from security company. Security guys, never, ever. No, because I feel myself more in danger, and I can't accept to work with someone who will tell me, go to this place, don't go, stay just 20 minutes or 15 minutes, you finish your piece to camera and you have to go. Okay, the only good thing I think I do is that I don't stay in the same place more than half an hour, because if there is someone who is following you and trying to contact his colleagues or friends to come to do something to you, he will not have enough time.
But Wahyu, how much of the responsibility is this on the editors and on the people, on our bosses, if you like, to make sure all the preparations are done properly, that the trust is with the people that your journalists are going to be working alongside, going to be putting their trust in? Yeah,
I think that's the main responsibility of the people who are in charge in the newsroom. They have to make sure that the reporters are in a safe hand. They're working with trusted parties. They know what they're doing. They understand the issue. So we always takes time to brief the reporters to, even when we select people that we send on assignment, we have to be convinced that the reporters in their past assignments have not written something that might endanger them in their future assignment, making sure that we don't mismatch. We send someone who used to embed with the police, who used to embed it with the military, to a group that have antipathy or have problems with the authorities, things like that. So it's really important for the people in the newsroom to make sure that happens.
Jahanzaib, we know that journalists from lots of different organisations will go into the same field, the same theatre, and all be chasing the same stories, really, or looking for the same interviews. How important is it, away from that competitive side, for those back at base to be seeing a bigger picture, if you like, and actually be working more closely with other organisations when it comes to safety, security, keeping your journalists in the field alive?
Well, one thing I'd like to start with, which I think Mariam mentioned, is that the reporters don't listen to the editors enough. We really want to care about your safety, but they're not listening just because there's this, maybe it's the ethos of being a journalist that I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get that story. So sometimes we have very ill-trained stringers who are running into regions, like when the North Waziristan operation was started in Pakistan. I won't name the guy, but he owns a petrol pump, and he was our main source for what was happening inside North Waziristan, and he was the main source for the New York Times as well. So imagine this guy, and no matter what we would tell him, he wouldn't listen, because he had no training. And this question of training kind of goes across the board in Pakistan, at least, because we suddenly jumped from about 1,500 journalists in 2005 to 20,000. So that's one of the key issues. But in terms of safety across groups, one of the things we've done in Pakistan, which is kind of cool, is that we've put every single important news director and editor across the media groups into a WhatsApp group. It's a very simple solution, but what this does is that when news breaks or when something happens with regards to violence against journalists, because that's what the group is for, we quickly make decisions about what we need to do across the media. So, someone has been kidnapped by one group. Do we report it or do we not report it? There's been a bomb scare inside a building of a media organization, my media organization. So do we take that to TV or not? These are the kinds of questions which you can answer in this WhatsApp group, which happens to have all these people there. In our case, we said, don't take the bomb scare onto TV because that's exactly what the terrorist wants us to do. And we managed to successfully stop that. And that was great. A second instance of this WhatsApp group working is that one of our journalists from a different organization, from a small newspaper, was picked up in Quetta, Balochistan. Again, a bit of a dangerous region. He was picked up by unknown men dressed in white. We had no idea who they were. Quickly on the WhatsApp group, we said, we have to make this an issue. Now, generally in Pakistan, if a journalist is picked up, we are talking headline 3, we are talking page 3 or 4 in the national pages, or just non-existent. What we did with the WhatsApp group is we quickly said, we're going to make this headline 1, and we are going to make this headline 1 all day. The editorial is going to be on this. We're going to put it on the front page. And we made sure every single stakeholder understood this. The guy came back in 3 hours.
I think it's a good point for any community, journalist community across the world, really. As if in Pakistan the editors can get together and put something like as simple as a WhatsApp group together, then anybody can do it. And if it helps security, then it has to be a good thing. We've almost touched a little bit on already, is the use of people in the field as sources, freelancers, activists. So much more nowadays we do rely on activists, but they are becoming almost journalists, or at least treated as journalists, Mariam.
Yes.
How do we
Yes.
use people in that way nowadays? It's not working.
I think we can't avoid to deal with activists or citizen journalists. This is a good thing, and we have to accept it, we have to admit it. But my point is that the activist is different from a journalist. And what we are watching in most of the Arab channels since the Arab Spring is on the screen we have more activists than journalists. Because the difference between a journalist and activist, I'm a journalist, I'm supposed to do a story. I'm not supposed to insult or hate Bashar al-Assad. I have picture of a child or a family killed by the regime. For me, it's enough. But the activist, he will use another vocabulary and another editorial style, which is completely different from me. Mm-hmm. And this difference will not help me to do other stories, to be accepted by certain sources and sometimes certain states. You know, that's the problem. So we have to work with them, but in a moderate way, and we have to filter also their work. We have to teach them, if they want to be professional journalists, we have to teach them to make a difference between your own opinion, okay, and what you should broadcast on TV. Because you have to make this kind of balance. We are never neutral when it's about human issues, at least for me. I can't be indifferent and just, reading my script, 30 people were killed by Syrian regime or by ISIS. No, there is something of me as a human being. But at the same time, the activists shouldn't take, to be upper than the journalist. And unfortunately, that's what's happening in the Arab channels since more than 5 years.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Again, we have the same problem with TV channels, and now imagine if you're a part of a media conglomerate. So the Dawn Media Group is a TV channel, it's a newspaper, it's a radio station, and it's online. What we have in our TV channels in particular are reporters, usually activists or people who have absolutely no experience with what they're doing, and they come on the TV channel, which has the broadest audience, and what they say has an immediate impact right across the board. Yeah. So somebody from the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan hears something which really shouldn't have been said on TV, and he immediately assumes this is the voice of the Dawn Media Group. So it's not a question of this was the TV channel who did it. This is a question of this entire group did it. And that's hugely problematic.
Can I add something? It's more complicated in the Arab world because you are dealing with religion sometimes, and this is very, very complicated when through your sentence you are insulting Shia or Alawi people. We shouldn't do that. We have to cover things. We have to work for peace more than for, adding weapons to the war. And that's the problem.
And Bakr, if I can ask you, Mariam's almost touching there a little bit on language and how important it is to get the language right. If you're in the field, if you're reporting from a place, if you don't get the language right, how much can that backfire on you?
Yeah, it can actually. If you don't really have a balanced editorial language, then it can really backfire. Our office in Baghdad was attacked twice, Al-Arabiya's office. I can say it openly, it's just because of the editorial policy. But what's the problem here? It's the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that the media organizations actually are having an editorial line that is with one party and against the other. This is here comes the problem. If we have an activist in the ground working, when the material comes, we have an editor who can really fix the language.
Yeah.
But the problem that the organization itself had an editorial line that is with one party and against the other. So here comes the problem. Here comes that the journalists in the field sometimes got kidnapped, got killed, harassed, deported. It's not a problem for a journalist to get deported or to get in trouble in order to get to come out with the truth, but it's a big problem if the editorial policy is not a balanced one. Here, I guess, the bigger picture comes with the channels or the organizations playing politics, I can say.
When you're considering what your output is when you've got people on the ground, what are the main concerns about worrying possibly what's going out, how it's going out, how it's written? Just talk to us a little bit about what goes through the news desk, what goes through everybody's minds, and what should go through their minds at least.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different opinion about the editorial policies, just like what Baker said just now. I think every media are entitled to have their own editorial policy. They have their own perspective in seeing things. But more importantly is how they make sure that their reporting is independent. Their reporting is not, driven by those editorial line. And I think the audience can see the difference where a news coverage is driven by a certain ideological or editorial policies and news coverage that are independent, objective, even though it's been reported in a media that has a very strong editorial policies toward one camp or another. Having said that, of course, safety is our first concern. When we receive the raw materials from our reporters back in the field, we try to make sure that the words that being chosen, the situation on the field. Are the reporters already out from that particular place? Are they still inside? When should we publish this and those kind of things? But sometimes, the dynamics in the newsroom, we need some really an open arguments. We need to make sure that our newsroom is diverse and have all of the difference of perspectives, so that those concerns can be taken into account. Because sometimes the difficulties is when a newsroom is dominated by one or two strong editors, sometimes different voices cannot be heard or cannot be taken into account because one editor dominates how the news is being published, and that's dangerous. So it's really important for editors to make sure that we have diverse opinion inside the newsroom.
Yeah, I think this question of editorial policy is very, very important, especially in a war-like situation.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. North Waziristan operation, the Pakistan army is hammering against the terrorists. My bureau chief calls me and says they have flattened an entire marketplace, which they claim was being used by terrorists. Now the question is, my bureau chief is saying, I have all the pictures. A lot of them have come from the wrong sources, but these are real pictures. We can see the bazaar has been trashed. What do you want to do? Should I send you a story? We spent half an hour trying to decide, do we want to run this story because the state had managed to, or at least the media had fallen in line. Everyone was talking about how amazing this operation was. So I called up my editor, my print editor, and we were like, well, what do we do? In the end, what we decided, and this was a tricky one, was we didn't do a report, but we took all those pictures and we ran a slideshow online. And we didn't say anything, but we managed to get those pictures out there. So all it was a headline, Miran Shah Bazaar destroyed, here are the pictures, that's it. So that was kind of a compromise and a way to deal with that sandwiching between what the terrorists want you to say or show and what the state wants you to say or show.
I admire your creativity. Okay, I want to move on now to how do you tell both sides when you are in the field? Obviously, when you are in a real war zone, you are generally embedded or you're with one group or the other, and how you cover both sides. And I'm going to start with you, Bakker. I'm just going to give one of my own little examples. When I was in Kandahar, the first week we were in the area of Jirai, we were on the Taliban side. We were explaining with the Taliban, who were telling us that they had halted the US push in that area, how they were winning the war according to them. And we did a report on that. But the following week we had an embed with the Americans. And our piece from the time we spent with the Taliban was delayed for some reason. I think there was a big story elsewhere. And the first day of our embed, the piece with the Taliban went out on Al Jazeera that day. So we turn up with the colonel, and they've just watched Al Jazeera with us standing with the Taliban. Relations didn't go well, as you can imagine. How difficult is it to try and weave that way, or even to try and tell a story from both sides when you are with one side?
It's really difficult, of course. It's the only way to report in such situation is to talk about what you see as a journalist and to quote. This is the only way out, actually. If I'm with, if I go to North Waziristan with Pakistan Army, they will show you what they want to show you. But again, as a journalist, I mean, it happened once. I went with the army, with Pakistan Army, to South Waziristan, and we were with the Chief of Army Staff at that time, General Shfakani, I guess, and with the Air Marshal. Everyone was there, and they were saying that the area is cleared, no Taliban here, and citizens or the local people can come back. While we were talking,
did they show you the basketball courts?
Yeah. While they were talking, we started receiving missiles from the Taliban side. So everyone has to run inside the bunker. So I have to talk about it. They have asked us clearly, the army, when this happened, don't report it. And there was a guy from Don, from your organization with us, and the guy went on his Suraya phone and directly reported what happened. They were not happy. But I have to report it. I've reported how we ran into bunkers, how the Chief of Army Staff was saying, we now ask the people of South Waziristan to go back. It's no more Taliban, and it is safe now. So you need to report what you see, and you need to quote. And if you can get access to the other side of the story, again, you need to quote them. You need to be very skeptical in conflict situation. No one is going to tell you the truth. You need to be very skeptical, and you need, if you want to talk, then you need to describe what you see, what you have heard, and then you need to quote. I guess this is the way I'm trying really to report.
And Mariam, Syria incredibly difficult for Al Jazeera.
Yes.
How do you try when you are in the field where it is very difficult to get the other side? But to do it in a safe manner that's not going to get you in trouble.
Yeah, it was a little bit complicated. I wasn't embedded. I was actually protected by the guys of Liwa Tawheed at that time.
I love it you won't have security guys, but they look after you.
They were very flexible with me. I think what I did, actually, I took advantage of being with someone, not to do propaganda to this faction, but to do real stories, about life in Aleppo, in Rif Idlib, about women, about children, about the lack of food, about electricity problem, about fuel problem. It was winter, it was very cold. So I try, to manage to take just the advantage of being with this guy to reach the place I want to go, but I avoid as much as I can, to talk about them.
Just before we throw it open to the floor for questions, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists, and I'll join in on this one because it's not a nice question. What have you got wrong that can help others get right next time? And I'm going to start with Jahanzaib at the end.
What have we got wrong? Many things. I think the most important thing we get wrong is this internalized self-censorship which has kind of gone through the reporters, through the editors, through everyone. So we have a mental checklist of things you cannot talk about. So you were talking about entering Balochistan and crossing over to meet Jandullah. In my head, I immediately thought I would never, ever send my reporter there, ever. And then I questioned myself, why? Why would I never do that? I have better access to that area than you do, probably. The reason is because of this self-censorship which is ingrained in our heads because we are terrified. We are terrified because if you look at the number of journalists who are kidnapped and murdered in Pakistan, it's pretty high. We have bombs. I told you about the bomb scare. Our vans were shot at last month. There's violence literally every week. So the self-censorship kicks in, and it's coming from both sides. So everyone has this list in their heads. Blasphemy law, how far can you talk about it? Anything religion-related, really. The Pakistan army, how far can you go on what they are saying is happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is a huge problem. I wish I could overcome it. But I also have to keep my 500, 600 people safe. So I'm not sure where this stands, but I do see it as a problem.
We are talking about covering extremism and surviving, so possibly that was the good thing to get wrong. Haque, what have you got wrong?
Well, to stay 18 months as a hostage was, yeah. But I think, it was a good pause. I don't want anyone to get kidnapped to have this long pause, but, but really sometimes we need to have a pause to think before we talk. This incident, I can't call it an opportunity, this incident really helped me to think a lot. It gave me this pause to think and not to talk. And I think we all journalists need really to think more than we talk. So this really will reflect on our work and will help us really sometimes not to talk, and allow me to use this word, rubbish. We have 24-hour channels. We need to fill the time on air. Sometimes really we talk rubbish on air. Yeah. So this pause really could help us really to think. We need to think more than we talk. Thanks.
I suppose the obvious one for me would be what happened in Egypt, which shows it's not a war zone, it's not a conflict zone, but it was a very tricky situation for anybody covering at the time. And we didn't recognize how things had changed quickly enough, and how we as journalists are not protected, even when we think we are, from the regime coming and picking us up and throwing us in jail. And then going the full force and taking us to court and convicting us. So I suppose the lesson from that is, even when you've been in a country for quite some time, and it had been months and months that we were in the same situation under this crackdown, we didn't recognize that the worst could happen. And so when it did, it was too late. So taking, I suppose, at least weekly checks, if not daily checks, as a temperature that you're operating in, and how maybe recognizing things have changed. Mariam?
Actually, I did many wrong things. I have to remember at least 2 or 3 of them. I wasn't responsible for one of them, actually, because I was supposed to do a live for Hasad, the harvest, the main important bulletin, at 11 p.m. There was shelling, airstrikes in Aleppo. I was supposed to do a live of maximum 8 minutes. They had a technical problem in the gallery in Doha, so they decided to continue with me. It was the only solution, to don't have black on Al Jazeera. So they were keeping asking me questions for more than half an hour, and there was airstrike, and I think I had to say, guys, it's enough. No more 2 questions. I'm sorry, for security reasons. I have to think about my safety, the safety of my cameraman. This is very important because the priority for me is the cameraman, and then me. I had to cut this detail, but I didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's funny though, because from my side, I think it's the opposite of what Jazz said from Pakistan. In Indonesia, our biggest mistakes probably the lack of filters, because I remember back in 2010, the police has this big raid on a big terrorist mastermind. His name is Nurdin Muhammad Top. Maybe some of you remember. He was reportedly cornered in a house in Central Java, and all of the big networks broadcasted like 24 hours coverage of the raid. And at the end of the day, nothing happened because they have mistakenly identified the person who is in the house. And the media was really bullied in the social media. Everybody was criticizing the media for, just believing what their sources said inside the police, that feeding them this information about that there are some big fish inside the house, and we misled the public for that. And I guess years after the first bomb at 2000, the Christmas Eve bombs, and the two Bali bombings, the Jakarta bombs, the media was too eager, too excited to follow the lead, join the police in getting all of these terrorists, and we lost our sensitivity. We lost our understanding of the bigger context, that this hatred is real, that this hatred towards the West, for instance, have a history, and we have to understand it in order to really give the audience a better sense of understanding the root cause of all of these terror acts. And after that, 2010, I think that's a watershed moment for us, because we then start to talk to each other. We have many discussions. We then even published a handbook for journalists to better our reportings on terrorism.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I always interject.
We have to go to questions. I'm being shouted at.
One last thing.
Quickly.
Social media is really something dangerous, because a lot of times our reporters are out there, they say one thing on the channel, they say one thing in the newspaper, and then they go ahead and say something completely different or something way over the top on their Twitter account, where a lot of people are monitoring them, and that also creates a lot of danger.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with him.
Questions? I think we've got a roving microphone somewhere. No, we haven't, so you might have to shout at us. Hello.
All right, I'll try to shout, I hope you can hear me. I'm Simon Lee, retired foreign editor of the Los Angeles Times. I have a sort of two-stage question. One, reporters and editors will recognize that people who work in these dangerous situations, foreign correspondents, have a particular personality. And when you have that important discussion as an editor with your reporter, and they're saying, I want to do this, they are also going to tell you that, or imply that their judgment is the best judgment. What do you know sitting 6,000 miles away at your desk?
Yeah.
But the responsibility is yours as an editor. If they get into trouble, you will have to deal with the mess as much as they do, maybe more.
So what's the question?
So, the question is this. If you tell them not to do it, and they do it, what do you do with the product? Do you use it? Does your institution accept the accolades that may come with it? Or do you say, we stand on principle, on the line of authority, on the judgment about safety, and ultimately the responsibility rests with the editor, and we will not use your product?
Jahan, what
Which
would
is,
you do?
by the way, a hypothetical question, because I've never heard of an institution rejecting the product
Me neither.
in those terms.
Me neither.
I'll tell you, this happens fairly frequently with us. And again, it comes from KP and Fatah, or Balochistan, where there's a lot, the conflicts are going on. Reporters always come to us, and they generally tend to be outside of the contract of Dawn Media Group. And they're freelancers, they're stringers who've worked with us for a long time. They will generally come with this attitude, and they'll be like, we're doing the story anyway, and then they will present it to us. We always reject it. We always reject the story.
I
Yeah.
Wahyu?
Well, staff generally wouldn't go there. I mean, we would still reject it.
You only
Dawn
have,
is
you
a
only have well-behaved staff.
we're a conservative organization, actually. I would put it that way.
I think hypothetically, I'll reject it, but in reality, if someone give me the stuff, I'll publish it because they already have it. They finish the reporting. They have like an exclusive. I think that's the biggest problem in our newsroom. Once when the reporter came in with a story that we cannot resist, we publish it.
I think this touches on the question of freelancers going into places that channels wouldn't send their own staff.
Yeah.
And you do encourage, you're right, if you take it. But it's a strong editor that turns around something extraordinary. And I suppose the other point is, if you don't take it, somebody else probably will. I can think of some channels, new channels I won't name, who would definitely take footage that was taken even in a very dangerous situation. Exactly. You said you had a second part. You're done, okay. Somebody else. Right at the back.
So on that note, more and more news organizations are relying on freelancers for content. These reporters, including myself, are no less danger than journalists with staff jobs. Arguably, they take on more risk with much less security and are often not paid enough to afford basic expenses, such as fixers who are trustworthy and can keep them safe. If you could talk a little bit more about the responsibility of news organizations towards freelancers and what can and should be done to change the status quo.
I mean, this is something we're all worried about. We talked about this earlier. That, the fact that freelancers are being almost used as cannon fodder by some organisations. What can we do as a body, if you like, to try and protect those that we do rely on?
Generally, in Pakistan, freelancers are fodder, as you mentioned. They are not protected. They are poorly paid. They are ill-trained. They will never get any resources. They'll probably not even get a camera, So that's the general rule. The Dawn Media Group but they do make the occasional exception. But even then, they only make the occasional exception. That guy I was talking about in North Waziristan, it got so dangerous for him and his family, we relocated him and we're paying for him, even though he's doing no reporting. But this is an extreme case. I think in general, the freelancers are it's very dangerous to be a freelancer in Pakistan or pretty much anywhere.
I mean, we as correspondents have a responsibility for freelancers because a lot of the time they're the people that find out about a story first, and then we turn up with all our guns and whistles, and and we're well protected. How much can we maybe put pressure on the editors? Maybe make the channels recognise how important they are.
Well, actually, the first thing they should get it trained. It's the responsibility of any organization they are working with to really get them trained and to equip them and to be more responsible towards them. We had a case with our freelancer or stinger who was working in Afghanistan, and he was killed. He was shot and killed. He was just like a freelancer, and he was working with other organizations. But I put pressure on my organization, and we have paid. We've sent his papers to the insurance company, and we have paid an insurance for his family. After he was killed, though he was not killed because he was working on a story for our channel, but the guy was attached with us. He used to give us material from Afghanistan, from the tribal belt in Pakistan, and unfortunately while he was crossing from Afghanistan into Pakistan, the bus was stopped. Unknown people entered the bus and they shot him. They called him, his name was Janullah Hashimzada, and one guy, when they blocked the bus, a guy entered the bus and he said, Janullah, he said, yes. He shot him immediately, he killed him. This guy was not an employee of Arabiya, but he was our stinger in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the organization was very much understanding, and the guy was compensated. His family was compensated, though when he was shot, he was not working on assignment for Al Arabiya. So I think we should get them training
And we should protect them because they are our main source of getting access to sometimes no-go areas.
The only thing I'd probably add was there are groups like the Frontline Club and the Rory Peck, obviously, in the UK, who are trying very hard to champion the freelancer. And the other thing I'd say is I know a lot of photographers who see their work appearing on all sorts of channels on websites, and they don't get paid for them. And I think, again, as a journalistic body, we should be putting pressure on that stopping. So thanks for your question. Somebody else?
Good morning. Laid Zaglami from Algiers University. One of the members of your panel said you can never be neutral about human issues. And I want to know if one of you have ever witnessed a situation about Stockholm Syndrome. Thank you.
Sorry, about what?
Stockholm
Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome.
Thank you.
Well, I think that one has to be you, really.
Yeah.
Does
No,
everybody know
not
what
at all.
Stockholm Syndrome means?
A kind of trauma?
It's when you actually decide that the people who captured you, you decide are right, and you kind of join forces with them. Did you have any sympathy for your captors?
Not at all.
Never.
But
I think they have done something wrong, and but it's an experience anyway. So if you look into it from a positive perspective, I have learned really a lot from this experience, even from them, the way they live, the way they look into life. For them, life is just this jungle. Some of them didn't come out of the jungle for the past 25 years, so they don't know even how to use mobile phones. Their life is this jungle only. So if you look into it from a positive perspective, to me, I've learned a lot, even from those who were holding me, the captives. I've learned from everything around me in that jungle. But to have a sympathy towards them, no, at all. I think they have done something wrong. They have no right to take my freedom just to get a ransom.
Right at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Najib Sharifi. I work with an organization called Journalist Safety Committee based in Kabul, Afghanistan. I have a question. On the 20th of January, Taliban attacked a bus carrying the staff of Tolo TV, which is Afghanistan's biggest news channel. The incident resulted in the death of 7 of the staff and injury of more than 20 of the staff of the TV station. The Tolo TV dedicated its broadcasts to this incident for 3 consecutive days, 24/7. We were, media support organizations and unions, asking Tolo to not dedicate that much airtime to the incident because that's exactly one of the objectives that the Taliban were pursuing, which is to gain as much attention and airtime as possible. This is one side of this story. The other side is that I've been following the Taliban attacks in Afghanistan, and most of them have been geared towards targets that produce maximum attention and so that they can get maximum airtime out of it. My question is that, well, with the first incident, what's the view of the panelists? Because it's very important for the TV station to give as much importance to the incident because 7 of their colleagues were dead and 20 were injured. But at the same time, you don't want to just unconsciously contribute to the propaganda agenda of the Taliban.
Yeah.
First of all, I think we should all say we were really sorry to hear what happened with the Tolo TV staff. So our sympathies go to all of you involved with that. Mariam?
I think it's a very tricky thing. I agree with him because, you don't know. If you broadcast, you are doing propaganda to Taliban or any other organization or faction. If you don't broadcast, it's also unfair, towards these guys, the journalists. They were killed, and they were working for this channel. It happened with us also when our colleagues were killed. So we were hesitating. Shall we broadcast first of all, shall we broadcast the news itself? And then shall we do a VT or an LVO? And then shall we make a debate or a program in our current affairs programs about this issue? I think, it's very complicated.
I've been challenged before now as to why do we protect stories about other journalists, but if it was just something that had hit civilians, we would definitely go out and report it. So, you know, are we taking, you know, a different attitude when they're journalists?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that the question is not publish or not publishing it, but how do we publish it? I think if an event is important, have that kind of magnitude, that kind of scale, the journalist, the media has no choice than to accept it, than to publish it. Not doing so is self-censorship. It's not going to do justice for the audience, for the public. So the question is, how do we publish that kind of event? And I think, I remember once Johan Galtung, the professor of peace journalism from Norway, mentioned something about we should not focus on the two opposing sides, two conflicting sides in the conflict. We have to also focus on the third parties, people who are not directly opposed to each other, but have a stake in making sure the conflict do not last. So those are like moderate ulamas, the counter-narrative of what happened. We should also give them enough space, enough airspace in that kind of coverage. So the publication is not mainly about the event and not a propaganda, but giving a counter-narrative of what the terrorist wants to achieve.
Well, just a little more addition. It actually pissed off the public a lot because, as I said, the channel dedicated 3 days of its broadcast to the incident. People were saying, people are dying in this country on a daily basis. So why don't you give that much attention to others who are dying? Because they're also people, they also have lives.
Do we give too much, Jahan? Do we give too much publicity when journalists are killed?
No, I feel that we actually don't. As you mentioned, a journalist's life is generally considered not as important when they're killed. My only piece of advice to your earlier question was the people who are decision makers across media groups need to be able to communicate, because that decision will probably be a better decision about any of these issues, whether it's a killing, whether it's a kidnapping. In your instance, for example, or in an instance of of what's happened in Pakistan, we may not broadcast a killing in such a manner, but instead, because we have so much clout together, we could go to the Interior Ministry, we could go to the PM House, we could go to the stakeholders who matter and try and say, look, we need further security, look at this specific attack, address it. Sending it out to the public might not be the right way to do it. Sending it to the right stakeholders with the right clout, and again, cross-media, that would be important.
That being the power cross-media.
Yeah. Cross-media.
Yeah. Another question? Sir.
Thank you. My name is N. Ravi, former editor-in-chief of the Hindu newspaper from India. Terrorists on the one side and security and intelligence forces on the other generally do not distinguish between objective, independent journalism and propaganda. Much less do they distinguish between opinion and news reporting. So in this context, I was wondering if the concern over safety of reporters in the field, and particularly when somebody is after a big interview on the other side of the security line, would that constrain the newspaper or restrain it in any way from expressing strong opinions on either side?
Who wants to answer that one? Go on, Johan.
We're so conservative, I don't know what to say. Definitely in that sort of case, or you could call it self-censorship, we would be hesitant to take anything from either side which was pushing an agenda. Let's put it that way. So it doesn't matter if the army chief has come out and said something which we find critical, we would take that in an editorial and challenge it, but in a measured manner. If we are looking at the Taliban, we will look at their statements, and this happens often when they claim attacks. So back in the day, like maybe 8-10 years ago, what would happen is all the media would immediately start broadcasting everything the Taliban were saying. In fact, they were taken live on TV to talk about the attack. Now what happens is there's barely one line in which it says the Taliban claimed responsibility. So it really depends, but this has kind of become a media culture in Pakistan, you could say. So it's a very balanced approach, I think, on either side of a non-state actor or a state actor.
I think, can I just add one point? I think at the end of the day, it's really back to what your media stands for, what's the culture inside your newsroom. I come from a media that believe that press freedom is uncompromised. It's the red line that you cannot cross. We've been banned several times by the regime back in the Suharto days in Indonesia because we pushed the envelope too far. So even though we have to sacrifice the existence of our media, if that's for the freedom of the press, we will do it.
Last question. Oh, okay. Martin.
Yeah, hi, Martin from Swedish Blank Spot Project. I have a question when it comes to states, because I feel that during the last year, we as journalists have learned a lot how to protect ourselves, but states has also learned that violence against journalists works. It doesn't have any consequences to jail us. And I mean, by jailing or killing the messenger, they kind of silence the message. It's a cheap form of censorship. So how do we higher the stakes when it comes to states? I would like your thoughts on that. Should it be a war crime to attack a journalist? Are there other ways to make it, I mean, yeah, so that attack on one journalist is an attack on us all, really, on a global scale? How do we do that?
Yeah, and just before we answer that, let's just remember one thing. I think it's less than 7% of deaths on journalists are resolved, which is a tiny figure. And the majority of journalists that are killed are the local journalists, not the big names in conflict, but it's the guys at the sharp end who are finding the nugget of a story when everybody else jumps on it.
Yeah.
So where should we start? Becca, do you want to answer that?
I mean, about, I didn't actually get the question.
What the state should do to
What?
protect,
How
what
do you
we
protect
should do to
journalists, and if one
protect
journalist
journalists
is
from the
killed,
violence
is it
of
an
the
attack on
state.
everybody?
It is actually, it's indeed. If a journalist is kidnapped or killed, if we don't really take it as a journalist, then I mean, then it will be all victims after that. So we need really to dig our heels, and we need really to talk about it. We need really to make it a case. You know, if someone is with the government, maybe we can do a lot. But if with militants, sometimes it's really difficult. This won't really help much. But yes, if attack on a journalist, one journalist, it's attack on the whole community. I agree with this.
I think social media now is the best weapon against all the states, because you can't hide anything. You know, you can't arrest a journalist and say, I don't know where he is. And you can't hit a journalist and say, I didn't do that. You know, you can use your mobile phone, or someone around can take some pictures of you when you were arrested by the police or the army. So I think we have to rely more and more on the social media, to make pressure on the states.
And I suppose, just as a last comment, that is the one thing that the Free AJ staff campaign did have, was the backing of media across the world. And I think that's why, in the end, we managed to get everybody out of prison and freed, was because everybody did rally together in solidarity. But on the back of that, I would say Egypt is still locking up a lot of local journalists. And there are an awful lot of journalists around the world who are being locked up.
Latin America.
Indeed. So solidarity, I suppose, should be our final message here. Thank you very much for listening and your great questions. And thank you to my panelists.
Thank you.